Welcome back. Firstly, Happy New Year. I hope everyone stayed safe. In this video, I clean out the fuel tank, the internals, as well as prepare the outside for final painting. You can see inside there, the tank's not overly dirty, but it was off the police bike I bought a few weeks ago, and the previous owner mentioned he hadn't had it run for like about 20 years, so I decided to pull it apart and use some electrolysis to clean out any rust that might still be in there. So first thing I do is just remove the sender unit and the fuel valve and seal those off, and then I make up a solution that I use to set up electrolysis, which will eat away any rust. The thing I like about this method is it doesn't eat away any good metal, unlike using hydrochloric or other acids. So what you need for electrolysis is you need an anode, which that's what I'm using that bar for, which is just a bit of mild steel. And then you need to make up a water solution with sodium carbonate, and in Australia it's washing soda. It's called electric acid, might be called a number of things, but at the end of the day it's sodium carbonate. It's not bicarb soda, sodium carbonate. And what you do is I use probably half a cup to a cup, and in 20 litres, heat it up in hot water just to dissolve it, and then put it into a bigger bucket. And then you need to fill your tank up brim fill. There's a few things you need to be aware of when doing this. One is that when you hook this up to your battery charger and it starts to work, you're actually creating hydrogen gas, which is highly explosive. So if you only fill this up 3/4 of the way, you have a quarter of your tank full of hydrogen gas, and if you get a spark, you're going to have bits of tank all over the place. So here's my anode. As I said, just mild steel. Another thing is you need to use mild steel. Don't make your anode out of stainless steel, because that gives off a poisonous gas. And the other thing is anode must not touch the tank at all. So you can see I put a few bits of rubber on it just to make sure it didn't make any contact. And you just hook it up to a charger. So I've got quite a substantial charger, and I guess how fast it's going to work is going to depend on the size of your charger and the amount of current. The thing I do too is I add this fuse. So this fuse is that in the event that the anode does touch on the tank for some reason, it'll just blow the fuse and I won't have any major problems. And normally when I do this process, I do end up blowing a couple of fuses because there isn't much clearance in there. So I've just turned it on here. I've got it all hooked up, and you can see I'm drawing about 6 amps, which is quite high on 12 volts. And you can see it bubbling away. It's literally after a few minutes. I leave it for perhaps an hour, and this is what it looks like after just an hour or so. So just to give you a bit of an idea. So what happens is the current goes from negative to positive, drawing any rust off of the tank and onto your anode, which I'm pulling out here. And you can see here the rust that's already coming off just after a short period of time. Now the other thing is the amount of current you're going to draw and how quick this is going to be dependent on the size of your anode. So I try to always make the anode as big as possible, like I've done here. If you make the anode just a little bolt or a small wire, it'll still work, but it will take a lot longer. The other thing is you need to be absolutely sure that the negative goes on the tank and the positive goes to your anode. So the positive is on the removable bar. That's the bit that is going to sacrifice itself. If you get it the wrong way around, you'll destroy your tank. So this is what it looks like after the first day, and even though the tank wasn't overly dirty, it just removes any rust that is in there, and it does a really great job, and it's so cheap. As it gets dirtier, the current goes down. So with this anode in my setup, it's about 6 amps, and you can see it went down to about 2. So I'll pull it out here. This is after about 12 to 15 hours, and you can see the amount of stuff that's starting to come off. So it's really doing a good job. Depending how dirty your tank is, you know, you need to refresh this a few times. And so this is the first probably 2 days. I put some bolts in there, shake it around to try to free up as much rust as I can, and you can see the colour of the water and how dirty it is. So that's a day and a half. If you want to see a really dirty tank, have a look at my previous video on my custom trike. I think it's part 4, and you'll see how good it is on a tank that was what I thought wasn't usable, and it just came up like new. So put some bolts in there, give it a good shake around, and then I just repeat the process after this. And the second time around, I get it pretty good. And as I say, you just need to be persistent with this. Depending on how dirty the tank is, this could take a day up to 4 or 5 days. Now this particular tank's hard to get stuff out of the way it's designed, so I just use a magnet, and the magnet picks up any bolts or stuff that I put in there, so that's quite easy and works really well. So this is after refreshing the liquid again and leaving it in for about 24 hours, and you can see how much more stuff come off. So this was the second time, and after this it was pretty clean. So I gave it a really good rinse out, and as I say, I was really happy with the finish. So you can have a look inside there. This particular tank is a bit hard to get a torch in, so it's hard to really get a good view, but it did come up pretty good. So what I do now is I've got some paint stripper. I want to remove the paint and get it back to bare metal, because I don't really know the history of this tank, and it's been sitting around for a long time. So I use a paint stripper. It's just a regular paint stripper. It works really well. You need to make sure you've got glasses and gloves, and when you do spray it down, make sure you're stepped away from it, because you certainly don't want to get this stuff on your skin or in your eyes. And it takes a couple of coats, because this tank, you know, did have quite a bit of paint on it, and unfortunately it looks like one side had a bit of bog, or body filler, and you know, I want to clean that out, just see what the story is with it, and make sure it's right. So the first thing I do after stripping the tank is I try to knock out the little dings that are in there. There's only 3 or 4, and they're quite small, and I wanted to get those right before I tackle that mess underneath all that body filler. So just use a glue gun, bit of hammering, and these popped out pretty well. So little pullers are worthwhile. I mean, I could bog over that or use body filler, and but you know, it's not very hard, so I just wanted it to be right. So once I had those knocked out, what I did is I got a wire wheel, and I removed all of that body filler that was on the side. And without knowing the history of the bike, it looks like this must have been done some time ago, and it's a complete mess, to be honest. So somebody must have dropped the bike. I don't know the story, and you can see once I get the wire wheel on it, it's a total disaster. It looks like it must have been done a long time ago, because the welding on it is actually arc, and all they've done is covered their sins with body filler. So first thoughts were, well, I'll try to knock them out, and I, you know, used the dent remover. I used some heat. I did some hammer work, and the more I tried, the more I realised that it was such a mess, and the only really way to do this properly was to cut that out and make a new section and weld it in. So that's ultimately what I did. So I cut it out, and I got a bit of 1mm mild steel, which is slightly thicker than the tank. The tank's probably 0.7 or 0.8, but it didn't really matter. Bent it up, and again, I don't have an English wheel just yet, so I just did it with an oxy, a hammer, and just persisted until I got the right shape. And bit of filing, bit of hammering, some patience, and I've got that plate to fit in really well. and when you look at it you can see the difference compared to that old piece that I cut out. It was just never going to work properly, and there were actually holes in that once I started to clean those welds up, so I just wouldn't have been happy with it. Who knows why somebody would do a repair like that, but anyway, as I say, I just wanted to do it properly. So I get the plate prepared, and just using a TIG I progressively tack it in position. It is quite fiddly, and I wanted it to be exactly fitted properly, so that, you know, I didn't have much of a gap to deal with, because that obviously makes it a lot easier when you're trying to weld something as thin as a fuel tank. So once I had that tacked up, I just went around, progressively tigged the plate in, bit of panel beating along the way, and you know, it turned out really well, and certainly a massive improvement from what it was. So once I had that welded in, I got the flapper wheel and just tidied up that TIG weld a little bit just to clean it off, and also panel beaded that into the profile that was pretty close, and we'll only need a bit of a skim of body filler once I get to that next stage. So just, yep, flapper wheel on there, and you know, come up super, very happy with that. You can see that once I got it back on the bike as well, that repair I think turned out as good as I could have hoped. I certainly had no chance of repairing the damage that was already there, so I think this was a good way to go. And given its condition and given this repair, I did find a bit of pitting inside the tank, just minor, and it's made me decide to coat the internals of this. So to do that, I'm using Pour 15, and I'll just show you the process I went through to coat that properly. So it comes in a kit, has metal prep, a degreaser, and the actual coating. So the cleaner or degreaser I'm not using because I used Electrolysis, but I did want to use the metal prep, which basically etches the tank ready for it to be coated. So you use the entire bottle, and you just keep it rotating around to keep the metal wet. And in this case, because it was bare metal, I left it in there for about 30 minutes and then thoroughly washed it out with water before blowing it out with air. And you want to do that pretty quick because you'll get surface rust otherwise. So I used a couple of rags, tried to get the water out as quick as I could, and then blew it out. And you can use a heat gun as well to speed up the process, but I had it all dry within probably 20 minutes of finishing the rinse. So there's a quick look in the tank. You can see it's come up really clean, and that's ready for the final protective coating. So there's a tin. It's actually a specific kit for fuel tanks. It's only 236ml tin, which looks tiny really. So what you do is you pour the entire tin in, and again roll this around. Now what I've found, I think you've got about half an hour to do this before it starts to thicken up, and surprisingly that tin is plenty for a 20 litre tank. They say it can do 25 litres. As you'll see at the end of this video, you drain it out what you don't use. So once I had it all coated and I was absolutely sure I had it in everywhere around the tank, I drained the excess back into the tin, and I ended up using about half of that small tin, and the coating turned out awesome. So you can just have a look in there. Really happy with that. Well, next video I will finish the body filler on this tank, get it ready for painting, and do the same with the custom seat. Stay tuned.